Welcome to Crazy Good Turns. Our goal is to celebrate people who do good deeds, big or small. We discover our stories through research and with help from you, our listeners. Visit our website at crazygoodturns.org/submissions to tell us about a person or organization who's done something great for someone else, and they could be featured on an upcoming episode. As always, thanks for listening. Can you just walk me through your logistics process? If I'm an orange.
If you're an orange, you're going to be ripening in the sun and feeling really happy, and you're going to be waiting, and you're going to be waiting, and you're going to get riper and riper. But you're not going to be picked, and you're not going to be put in a box until Food Forward has a home for you, because we have no refrigeration. At this point, our logistics and our whole model is based on what we call just-in-time rescue, which means whether it's a farmer's market, it's a backyard harvest, or it's those big honkin' trucks downtown, is we place every piece of produce before we pick it up or take it off a tree, because we don't want to be the ones wasting the food once we've secured it. Does that make sense?
That's Rick Namias, and his story is about fruit and vegetables, but also about rampant waste and hunger and the vision to connect those dots for the greater good. This is Crazy Good Turns. We tell inspiring stories about people who do amazing things for others, and I'm your host, Brad Shaw. Up to 40% of food in the U.S. is wasted, just thrown away. Yet 1 in 6 people lack adequate access to food. In 2009, Rick Namias literally stumbled on a solution to this problem, a solution that would become the nonprofit he founded, called Food Forward. But he cites his somewhat privileged upbringing in Southern California as the root of his passion for the cause.
I grew up in an upper-middle-class background in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. It's a kind of bedroom community of Southern California. And I say that because I grew up around a culture of abundance and excess, and at times entitlement. And as I got older and I went to college in New York, and I had the good fortune to travel and work abroad, and then come back to LA, it was glaring to me when I came back how much this city has to give and how little of it is actually harnessed. And it became my own kind of pet peeve or soapbox, if you will, when I saw families with 3 cars and 2 homes and kids with more toys than they didn't know what to do with. And it went from a point of actually having a lot of judgment about it to saying, what the F am I going to do about it besides just live a different life?
It actually took Rick a while to figure out what the F he'd do about it. After graduating from New York University's film school in 1989 with a double major in film and religion, he embarked on a career as a screenwriter. He says he got some decent momentum working in Hollywood, but a 3-month writer's strike forced him to find other work to make ends meet. So he took a job as a writer and researcher for a political columnist, but was always looking for a cause that would be more fulfilling, something he could devote his life to.
And my issue became food. I actually trained as a professional cook. I did a lot of travel around food, and I started seeing it as this really, really rich common denominator around building community, family, and healing, especially in the post-9/11 paradigm. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with it. I found the professional chefing really neat, and I was good at it, but it kicked my butt. And even in my mid-30s, I was long in the tooth to do it. And I also knew that I loved cooking so much that by monetizing it, I was going to somehow lose the joy. But the photography was still something that I did, and I felt...
So Rick quit his job as a chef, picked up his camera, and became a professional photographer. He made enough money to self-fund research trips into California's agricultural belt to learn more about that state's vast migrant worker community.
What I found was that I was really drawn to stories of modern-day migrant farm workers, because these people were living this really cruel irony of feeding the best-fed country in the world, yet not making enough money to feed their own children. And it just didn't go away. By some odd chance, I was living on the edge of Beverly Hills in an old apartment. You know, it was the beginning of the internet back then, believe it or not, and so people would often send me hard copies of reports or information, and I always felt so incredibly self-conscious that when I gave them my zip code, it was literally 90210. And, you know, here's a guy studying poverty who's living in Beverly Hills. And, you know, again, that paradox wasn't lost on me, but it made me think even harder about what do we have in our city, in our state, where just a few hours or even a few miles away, there's a complete vacuum of. And so where I was drawn was to get into the issues of migrant farm workers and the cost of feeding the country from a human perspective. But I also found creatively I was really pulled into and compelled by stories of folks who were living on the margins and kind of living on the margins with dignity and with a sense of community and a sense of pride and a sense of determination.
California has more than 1 million migrant farm workers who supply the U.S. with more than half the produce the country consumes each year. Seeing their deplorable living conditions firsthand inspired Rick to bear witness to their plight through the Migrant Project, an exhibition of Rick's photographs of migrant workers throughout California.
If there was ways of building more dimension around the us and them equation, and for us to see them and them to see us, maybe some empathy could be built, and maybe upon that empathy, compassion could, take place. It may have been wishful thinking, but at least it was something I felt I needed to explore. I think I also was greatly motivated by the stories of Edward R. Murrow and Harvest of Shame and the photographs of Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange. And it was an attempt to, in a sense, touch base with the communities and the archetype of the farm worker and where were they today in the year 2000, 2002, 2003. And in a sense, I didn't necessarily start that journey with the idea to create the Migrant Project. It was really after a couple of trips when I started seeing the diversity of images and stories and the power of these faces that I felt, whoa, maybe there's something here.
The exhibition went on to become a book and documentary, garnering national press for Rick and his work. He tells the story of one trip he took to Fresno to explore rumors of a farm that was literally enslaving workers from Central America. He arranged to get snuck onto the farm, covered by a blanket in the back of a van.
So we arrived, they made sure the coast was clear, and then they kind of took me out of the van I was in. And we began to walk around this farm, which was so isolated that the people there were basically working off the cost of being coyoted into California with no cell phones, with no connection to the outside world. I don't know exactly the network that connected them and how the people that brought me to the farm learned of it. But I could tell you the stench of the sewage in what was supposed to be a working bathroom, what existed as supposed to being a kitchen for these people, that was basically one burner, surrounded by cockroaches. This was basically in no way, shape, or form anything less than like indentured servitude, and maybe it was slavery without the chains on it, right? I guess these guys could have, take a run for it at night if they wanted, but they had no place to go. And the network at which, they'd have to get several miles before they were home free. And then again, where would they go? The next day I was just numb. And it's like, what do you do? What can you do?
Rick's work on the Migrant Project was important and fulfilling to him, but he still searched for a cause he could sink his teeth into and affect real change, preferably something tied to his love of food.
I needed something more immediate. I needed something that I could feel tangible and participatory in my community. I needed to, in effect, turn the other cheek on what was a lot of bitterness and anger that drove the creative work I was doing.
And that something presented itself in January 2009.
I had a dog, a mixed lab named Scout, and Scout was like, 12, 13 years old. And although she was an amazingly athletic dog at that age, she was slowing down, taking walks that were twice as long as they used to take. And so I became more aware of my surroundings as I walked her because I was taking so much more time to get through it. And as we would walk around the neighborhood, I would see these fruit trees, like lemon, orange, grapefruit that were just loaded. This is coming into the winter, which in California is citrus season. All the trees are laden and start to drop the fruit if it's not picked. But basically, I'm seeing perfectly good fruit that is just going to waste. And as I get in my car just a couple of miles away, I'm seeing lines at food pantries, lines that I had never seen before. And I'm just like, this isn't right. This can be connected. This is at least a ecosystem that I live in, that within a few miles there's a problem and there's, I believe, a parcel solution. So I called the local food pantry, literally went on Yelp and found the closest food pantry because I was lazy. I asked them, hey, if I pick some oranges off a tree and I drop them at your place, would you take them? They're like, sure, bye, click. That was it.
Rick talked to a neighbor who had fruit trees in her yard, and she agreed to let him harvest them to bring to a local food bank. He put an ad on Craigslist asking for volunteers.
I got a bunch of replies, and one person showed up at my driveway the day we did it. We got some boxes from Costco, and then we went over to this woman's house, a friend of mine, a block and a half away, and we began harvesting. Quickly learning you have to trim tangerines. You can't just pluck them off the tree because they tear. By the time we were done that first day, there was like close to 100 pounds of tangerines in the back of my car. It's a lot of tangerines, but most importantly was the feeling of like liberation and excitement of being up in a tree, of taking fruit and knowing within a couple of hours you were helping be an agent of delivery, an agent of change. So 1 week fell into 3, and by the end of the third week, we had about 800 pounds off these 2 trees. And this food bank was like, great, but they didn't expect to see us back again. And I just said, this is big. You look over from that height and the neighbor's yard has avocados or grapefruit or what have you. And it became very clear that there was a lot more here than one little day experience.
Rick began doing harvests on a weekly basis and created Food Forward to organize the volunteers and distribution of the fruit to local food banks and pantries serving the poor. They weren't an official nonprofit at the time, just a ragtag grassroots group of volunteers exercising their passion for their community.
Our first year, to my amazement, we had a budget of $3,400. That was basically T-shirt sales, right? We repurposed a beautiful old fruit crate label and called it Food Forward. We built a rinky-dink website, and we sold some T-shirts, which is great. I'd see who had a fruit tree that wasn't using it. I'd knock on their door and say, hey, Heather 3 doors down? She just let us do X. Will you let us do it at your place? And they're like, yeah. It was ballsy. It was like, let us in your backyard. And I do, to be very, very transparent, of the $3,400 that we raised, the first $700 check was a liability policy for insurance. I had to let people know we were fully insured, or no one was going to open any backyard besides 1 or 2 friends.
That first year, Rick and his volunteers harvested more than 100,000 pounds of backyard citrus, and within 2 years, Food Forward filed for 501c3 status with Rick as the executive director.
One of the big takeaways for me was that LA did not need another food pantry. There were 1,300 access points for people who were food insecure, a term we use for folks who are basically going hungry. What they needed was a consistent, reliable, free source of produce that they were not getting from other channels. And that's where I saw we could slip in as a niche. There would be less wear and tear on volunteers because there's amazing burnout on people who are working at food pantries for many reasons, but that we could actually keep that supply going. And so it became a way for us to just keep on feeding agencies and use the logistic systems that they themselves would be able to take to the finish line. And to this day, that's how we exist.
Under Rick's leadership, Food Forward dramatically expanded its operations and is now one of the most important sources of food for the agencies, pantries, and food banks, helping address the problem of food insecurity in Southern California.
Now, the backyard harvesting was the starting point, and it remains, like in our genetics, the heartbeat of the organization. I call it a gateway drug because so many people just have to be on a backyard harvest to understand what Food Forward is and what our ethos and our culture and our possibility of growth is. In the third year, we started piloting a farmers market program where we go to farmers markets across Southern California. We started with 3. We're now at about 25. And basically what we do is at the end of a farmers market session is we again use a volunteer team to solicit donations from farmers of produce that's perfectly good, but because it's very fragile or super ripe, it wouldn't make it back the week later for another farm session, and they would just chuck it. So instead, they box it up and we weigh it and we give it out to agencies, again, in a very organized, accountable, consistent way. Those 2 programs, again, are volunteer-powered with a small staff that organizes it, keeps it pumping. The big program that started 2 years later, which is about 4.5 years old now, is our wholesale recovery program, and that basically takes the idea of the farmers market program of working with individual farmer donors, or in this case, it's downtown LA at the wholesale district, where we're picking up pallets and truckloads of otherwise discarded produce that's perfectly viable. It runs at about a 90% viability level, which means only about 10% of that produce is just not fit for consumption, but 90% is as good as what you and I would buy at Whole Foods or, Ralph's or Kroger or anything.
Today, Food Forward has a staff of more than 20, managing 4,000 to 5,000 volunteers a year, up to 200 volunteer events a month. They harvest and distribute more than 300,000 pounds of produce a week and more than 42 million pounds since they started. And it's not just oranges, lemons, and limes. It's bok choy, dragon fruit, kumquats, eggplants, melons, and cucumbers. One recipient of their produce is Seeds of Hope, a food justice ministry of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles.
At each site where we do our nutrition classes, we also install a garden. And that garden is actually installed, maintained, and cultivated, harvested by our volunteers and by participants that also come to the cooking and nutrition class. So they get to grow food and learn how to grow food and also learn how to cook it in a healthy way.
That's Erica Nieves, the health educator for Seeds of Hope. And here she describes the people they serve.
So a typical family that we serve that participate in our programming is SNAP Ed eligible, so they probably or most likely receive food stamps, and they most likely live in a household where one or two other families also live in the same home. Sometimes it's in an apartment, and there are children, and sometimes most of the time they're taking care of somebody who's sick, so they can't work, or they work two jobs to be able to sustain their families. Most of our participants are moms, middle-aged women, and Latino, African American, low income, for sure. And so there are already just so many disparities there. These are the people that come to our cooking classes. These are the people that come to receive food. These are the people that tell me, thank God that we have food because I saved $20, $30, $40 here that I could now spend on rent, or I could spend on, gas or my bus pass to get to work. And so that's the reality of our participants, and we see that every day.
Erica says that their partnership with Food Forward is critical to helping those families.
And there's no one like them out there. Everyone knows that we get the food from Food Forward, and everyone knows that none of this would be possible without it. And having the fresh produce and the vegetables and the fruits. And
while the issues Rick is fixing are in his own backyard, that work reflects a broader worldview, and one that resonates with all of us here at Crazy Good Turns.
If there's one thing that Food Forward hopefully represents, it's understanding the lens of abundance through which we can all look and grow and benefit from. That I don't care where you come from. I don't care if you're living in a camper on the street or you're living in a Bel Air estate. There's always something you have in abundance that someone else can benefit from. And it could be oranges off a tree, or it could be just a smile. But that sense of connecting and sharing and gifting and giving something unselfishly that you yourself do not need, that someone else will benefit for, is where this whole country needs to go. And if that's the one thing that this organization helps bring to the third dimension and really kind of manifest, then to me it's successful.
I'm Brad Shaw, and thanks for listening to this episode of Crazy Good Turns. Go to crazygoodturns.org to learn more about or donate to Food Forward. You can also submit your ideas for extraordinary people or organizations we should feature. And stay connected with us between episodes by following us on Facebook and Twitter. This season, we're excited to announce that we're giving a $50,000 grant to the nonprofit that does the most to creatively spread their Crazy Good Turn story, a virtuous and self-reinforcing circle of gratitude. We'll announce the grant recipient next season. Crazy Good Turns is audio engineered by Stephen Key. Music supervision and mixing by Score in Los Angeles. Research and editing by Martine Chaussard, and a special thanks to Megan Basinger.
I know what we work towards every day in our office and out in the fields and out in orchards and out at the markets. It's about cultivating a release of what's in it for me and more about what's in it for us.